Indians seized and then came to dispose of their booty, have their rebels, and fit out new expeditions in the English colonies.
Vanderskamp had served in this hopeful school, and having risen to importance among the buccaneers, had pitched upon his native village and early home as a quiet, out-of-the-way, unsuspected place, where he and his comrades, while anchored at New York, might have their feasts and concert their plans without molestation.
At length, the attention of the British government was drawn to these piratical enterprises which have become so frequent and outrageous. Vigorous measures were taken to check and punish them. Several of the most noted freebooters were caught and executed. 3 Vanderskamp's chosen comrades,
The most riotous swashbucklers of the wild goose.
were hanged in chains on Gibbet Island, in full sight of their favorite resort. As to Vanderskamp himself, he and his man Pluto had again disappeared, and it was hoped by the people of Communipaw that he had fallen in some foreign brawl.
Or been swung off some foreign gallows.
For a time, therefore, the tranquility of the village was restored. The worthy Dutchmen once more smoked their pipes in peace, eyeing with peculiar complacency their old pests and terrors, the pirates, dangling and drying in the sun on Gibbet Island. This perfect calm was doomed at length to be ruffled. The fiery persecution of the pirates gradually subsided. Justice was satisfied with the examples that had been made, and there was no more talk of Kidd and the other heroes of Light Kidney.
Calm summer evening. A boat, somewhat heavily laden, was seen pulling into Communipaw. What was the surprise and disquiet of the inhabitants to see Jan Jost Vanderskamp seated at the helm, and his man Pluto tugging at the oars. Vanderskamp, however, was apparently an altered man.
He brought home with him a wife, who seemed to be a shrewd and to have the upper hand of him.
He was no longer the swaggering, bully ruffian. But affected the regular merchant, and talked of retiring from business and settling down quietly to pass the rest of his days in his native place.
The Wild Goose Mansion was again open, but with diminished splendor and notoriety. It is true, Vanderskamp had frequent nautical visitors.
Yet the sound of merriment was occasionally overheard in his house.
But everything seemed to be done under the rose.
And old Pluto was the only servant that officiated at these orgies.
The visitors were by no means of the turbulent stamp of their predecessors, but quiet, mysterious traders, full of nods, winks, and hieroglyphic signs, with whom, to use their cant phrase,
Everything was small.
Their ships came to anchor at night in the lower bay, and on a private signal, Vanderskamp would launch his boat.
And accompanied solely by his man Pluto.
Would make them mysterious visits.
Sometimes boats pulled in at night in front of the Wild Goose, and Vanderskamp and his comrades unloaded our various articles of merchandise in the dark. Nobody knew whither.
one of the more curious of the inhabitants kept watch and caught a glimpse of the features of some of these night visitors by the casual glance of a lantern, and declared that he recognized more than one of the freebooting frequenters of the Wild Goose of former times. From whence he concluded that Vanderskamp was at his old game, and the mysterious merchandise was nothing more nor less than piratical plunder.
Some observed that this was no more than Vanderskamp and his comrades, having been driven from their old line of business by the oppressions of government, have now resorted to smuggling to make both ends meet.
Be that as it may, I come now to the extraordinary fact which is the butt end of this story. It happened late one night that Janjas Vanderskamp was returning across the broad bay in his light skiff, rowed by his man Pluto. He had been carousing on board of a vessel, newly arrived, and was somewhat obfuscated in intellect by the liquor he had imbibed. It was a still, sultry night. A heavy mass of lurid clouds was rising in the west, with a low muttering of distant thunder.
Vanderskamp called on Pluto to pull lustily, that they might get home before the gathering storm.
The old Negro made no reply, but shaped his course as to skirt the rocky shores of Gibbet Island.
A faint creaking overhead caused Vanderskamp to cast up his eyes when, to his horror, he beheld the bodies of his three-pot companions and brothers in iniquity dangling in the moonlight.
Their rags fluttering and their chains creaking.
As if they were slowly swung backward and forward by the rising breeze.
What do you mean, you blockhead?
Cried Vanderskamp.
By pulling so close to the island?
I thought you'd be glad to see your old friends once more.
Growled the Negro.
You were never afraid of a living man. What do you fear from the dead?
Who's afraid?
Hiccupped Vanderskamp, partly heated by liquor, partly nettled by the jeer of the Negro.
Who's afraid? Hang me! But I would be glad to see them once more, alive or dead at the Wild Goose. Come, my lads in the wind!
Continued he.
Taking a draught and pushing the bottle above his head.
Here's fair weather to you in the other world. And if you should be walking the rounds tonight, odds fish, but I'll be happy if you will drop into supper.
A dismal creaking was the only reply. The wind blew loud and shrill, and as it whistled round the gallows and among the bones, sounded as if they were laughing
crashed and peeled, and the lightning kept up an incessant blaze. It was stark midnight before they landed at Communipaw, dripping and shivering, dancing and crawling.
It was completely sobered by the storm. The water soaked from without, having diluted and cooled the liquor within.
Arrived at the Wild Goose, he knocked timidly and dubiously at the door, for he dreaded the reception he was to experience from his wife. He had reason to do so. She met him at the threshold in a precious ill humor.
Is this a time
Said she,
to keep people out of their beds, to bring home company, to turn the house upside down?
Company?
Said Vanderskamp, meekly.
I have brought no company with me, wife.
No, indeed. They got here before you, but by your invitation. And blessed-looking company they are, truly.
Vanderskamp's knees smote together.
For the love of heaven, where are they, wife?
Where? Why, in the blue room, upstairs, making themselves as much at home as if the house were their own. Oh.
Vanderskamp made a desperate effort, scrambled up to the room and threw open the door.
Sure enough, there at the table on which burned a light as blue as brimstone sat the three guests from Trivet Island.
with halters round their necks and bobbing their cups together.
As if they were hobnobbing and trolling the old Dutch freebooters' glee.
Since translated into English.
For three merry lads be we, and three merry lads be we. I on the land, and thou on the sand, and Jack on the gallows tree.
Vanderskamp saw and heard no more.
starting back in the corridor, he missed his footing on the landing place.
And fell from the top of the stairs to the bottom.
He was taken up, speechless.
And either from the fall or the fright was buried in the little Dutch church at Bergen on the following Sunday.
From that day forward, the fate of the wild goose was sealed. It was pronounced a haunted house and avoided accordingly.
No one inhabited it, but Vanderskamp's shrew of a widow.
And no Pluto is able to consider a little better than its hobgoblin visitors.
Pluto grew more and more haggard and morose. He looked more like an imp of darkness than a human being. He went about muttering to himself, or as some hinted, was speaking to the devil, though unseen, was ever at his elbow.
Now and then he was seen pulling about the bay in his skiff alone in dark weather or at the approach of nightfall.
Nobody could tell why, unless on an errand to invite more guests from the gallows.
Indeed, it was affirmed that the Wild Goose continued to be a house of entertainment for such guests, and that on stormy nights the Blue Chamber was occasionally illuminated, and the sounds of diabolical merriment were overheard mingling with the howling of the tempest.
time of the equinox.
There was a horrible uproar in the wild goose, which could not be mistaken. It was not so much the sound of revelry, however, as strife.
The two or three piercing shrieks that pervaded every part of the village. Nevertheless, no one thought of hastening to the spot.
On the contrary, the honest burghers of Communipaw drew their nightcaps over their ears and buried their heads under their bedclothes at the thought of Vanderskamp and his gallows companions.
The next morning, some of the bolder and more curious undertook to reconnoiter. All was quiet and lifeless at the Wild Goose. The door yawned wide open, and had evidently been open all night, for the storm had beaten into the house.
Gathering more courage from the silence and apparent desertion, they gradually ventured over the threshold.
The house had indeed the air of having been possessed by devils. Everything was topsy-turvy.
Trunks had been broken open, chests of drawers and corner cupboards turned inside out, as in a time of general sack and pillage.
But the most woeful sight was the widow of Janos Vanderskamp, extended a corpse on the floor with the marks of a deadly gripe on the windpipe.
All now was conjecture and dismay at Communipaw, and the disappearance of old Pluto, who was nowhere to be found, gave rise to all kinds of wild surmises.
Some suggested that the Negro had betrayed the house to some of Vanderskamp's buccaneering associates, and that they had decamped together with the booty. Others surmised that the Negro was nothing more nor less than a devil incarnate, who had accomplished his ends and made off with his dues.